The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, whether you're here for the live Q&A or you are listening to this post-session as a recording. We appreciate you joining us. My name is Brittany Piquel. I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales for Next Generation, and we are going to talk to you about self-directed IRAs. If you're here, you probably received a notification through the NAPFA organization. That's an organization we participate in as well. So we wanted to reach out to the advisor community and see if we could provide some education to you regarding this topic, as it's one that's become increasingly popular over the years here. So we wanted to try something different than just sharing a presentation with you, and try to do this as a Q&A where you as the audience have the opportunity to ask the questions that are most important to you, and I am on deck to answer any and all questions that you have. So if you're on the webinar and you have some questions that you'd like answered, I'm going to give everyone a minute or so to enter any questions you have into the box on the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a panel there, and you should be able to see the opportunity to type in a question. So when you do that, I will get a notification, and what I'll do is I'll read through the questions that we receive, and I'll go through the answers. And then if we have any lapse in questions, I'll share with you sort of some frequently asked questions, so that may give you some food for thought to ask additional follow-up questions. As I'm waiting for those to enter questions, I think that, let's see, okay, there are questions coming in, so that's great. So as they're coming in, just a couple items. The webinar is being recorded, as I mentioned earlier. So if for whatever reason you weren't able to attend or you missed something, this will be distributed to everyone who registered. And if you would like a copy of the slides, or I'm sorry, not the slides, the recording to share, it will be emailed to you. If you have any feedback, I will be sharing my contact information with you in that follow-up email. So if you have any suggestions or ideas as to how we can improve these in the future, or you just would prefer to have a one-on-one conversation as a follow-up, I think that we could definitely arrange for something of that nature. So I am going to take a look at our first question. It is, what are the most common assets that you see in self-directed IRAs? So the most common asset types, for sure, the number one asset type in terms of prevalence is real estate. Now, within real estate, there are other classifications from a financial institution standpoint that we look at. So real estate obviously can encompass so much, right? So we see a lot of individuals using IRAs or self-directed retirement plans to directly purchase property that they either fix and flip or they buy and hold, in which case proceeds from sale of a fix and flip would be their investment earnings that would go directly back into the IRA. And then, of course, rental income from a buy and hold would be regular earnings for that IRA as well. And, of course, those earnings would be either tax deferred or tax free, depending on the type of account that they have. And that property, that real estate, it can be residential, it could be commercial. So on the commercial side, we do see a lot of syndications, in which individuals pool their funds together into a larger sort of limited partnership that will then go ahead and purchase commercial properties, or maybe apartment buildings, apartment complexes, higher price properties that they may not have enough to cover within an individual IRA. But of course, when pulled together, they're able to passively take part in those sorts of transactions. I would also say that we do see a lot of lending on the real estate side as well. So it is also common for individual investors to use their IRAs to lend funds, whether to another individual that's investing in real estate or to an entity that's investing in real estate, in which case a promissory note's executed. The IRA is considered the lender, Again, the borrower can be an individual or the borrower can be an organization, whether it's an LLC, some other sort of corporation as well, as long as it's private, of course. And then the IRA will earn its income by principal and interest paid back. And then there are some cases where they may get equity in addition to the principal and interest, depending on the investment. And the terms of those notes can be flexible. There are certain things that we do look for to make sure are included, but we don't dictate the terms of the notes. Those are determined between the investor, the lender, and the borrower. So I would say real estate for sure. Obviously, we could go on and on about real estate. Private equity is the second largest asset class if we're looking at it from a high level standpoint. So we see a lot of investment in startup companies. Pre-IPO stock is another big one that we're seeing with IRAs. As you probably noticed, there's been a lot of that going on. So last year we had investments in Spotify, investments in Slack, in Uber, in Lyft. Those are common as well. Or they could really just be, smaller startups that are just looking for funding, in which case the IRA takes a portion of equity, and then the IRA may receive dividends as their earnings, which can either be reinvested into the company, or those earnings would just be taken back as cash into the IRA, and then the investor, the IRA owner, would have the ability to choose a new investment, to take a withdrawal of that cash, whatever they'd like to do from that point on. We also do see a lot of partnerships, newly formed partnerships. So in the case where individuals may want to come together with their IRAs, or maybe a combination of IRAs and personal funds, and then again, sort of pool their funds together in order to purchase either property or maybe some other form of business, they can form basically a new LLC or corporation, and then they can fund it as partners with their own accounts. So that's another thing that we see a lot of. Let's see, what else? Precious metals for sure. Gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. As long as they fit certain quality standards, those can also be held in IRAs. The metals themselves need to be held in a depository or a financial institution. They cannot be held by the IRA owner personally due to certain IRS regulations, because we're talking about tax advantage accounts. But precious metals are definitely common as well. As you can imagine, the cryptocurrency trend, it's still pretty much alive. It's not as hot as it was a year or so ago, but there is the ability to invest in cryptocurrencies, digital assets with an IRA. In fact, we're doing a webinar at the end of July on that very topic. We also see, if I actually go back to the real estate category, foreign real estate, purchases of raw land that can later be developed. There's really just a plethora of things and ways that people can get creative. But those are some of the most common, I would say, as far as what we typically see. So hopefully I answered that question to the fullest for you. Trying to see here if we have any other questions. Okay, great. We do have another question here. This question is related to prohibited transactions. So the statement is, I'm concerned about self-dealing rules causing the IRA to lose its tax-deferred status. Is this a problem? And if so, how do you manage it? Great question. So self-dealing rules and prohibited transaction rules in general are extremely important, namely because of the consequences if they are to take place. And just to back up for anyone who's unfamiliar with prohibited transactions in general, this all ties back to the IRS's regulation of retirement accounts and their ability to set rules and restrictions on what can and cannot be done with an IRA. So as you can imagine, when you get into the world of alternative assets, every investment can be pretty much unique and different. So A lot of times when you put the onus on the account owner or the investor to start investing in non-publicly traded assets, as you know from the previous discussion we just had, you can get pretty creative, and that's great. But it is important to understand that you can be creative within the guidelines that the IRS sets. The IRS has rules about who can and cannot benefit when an IRA makes an investment. And as you can imagine, a lot of times individuals tend to skirt the line between using their IRA to make an investment for the benefit of the IRA and using an IRA to make an investment that might benefit them personally in the short term. So when we talk about self-dealing, that's basically what we're saying, is rather than the IRA's benefit being the focal point and only the IRA's benefit, the individual who owns the account or other individuals related to the owner of the account may seek to benefit from the retirement account's investment. So it is definitely a problem if there is not proper education provided to the investor to ensure that they understand what can be considered self-dealing and how to start thinking about investment options so that they are not going down that path of structuring something in a way that would present an issue with self-dealing. And one of the other reasons why self-dealing can be a concern is sometimes there's a lot of gray area with respect to the IRS rulings in different cases. And again, because every case is so unique, the IRS may or may not consider something self-dealing, and it's not necessarily a black or white determination. There's not really a book on what is or is not self-dealing. So you do have to be careful about looking at situations where, for example, when we get into the self-dealing topic, an individual uses their IRA to invest in a company, let's say a privately held company, but if on the side they're providing consulting to that organization and they're being compensated for personal services, and the compensation is being paid to them personally, and it's tied back to the IRA's investment into the organization, then that would be an example of self-dealing, right? It's kind of a double benefit. There's one going to the IRA and there's one going to the owner of the IRA. You also have to look not just at the owner of the IRA, but anyone that the IRS defines as disqualified persons from that particular IRA. There is a list of disqualified persons. We have published some content on the topic of prohibited transactions in general that we would be happy to share with you. And if you wanted to share it with clients, it does outline all the different types of prohibited transactions, who are considered disqualified persons, and examples of investments that would be prohibited. So we're happy to share that, but importantly, the end of that question is how do we manage it? And that's a good question because we're here for a reason. And as a financial institution that's custodying these accounts and managing some of the administration and record keeping associated with them, part of our mission is not only to educate account owners, but also to monitor activity taking place on the accounts from an IRS compliance standpoint. Now, it's not to say that if we're monitoring it, that a prohibited transaction would never take place, because oftentimes if the account owner is making decisions related to the account without our knowledge, they may accidentally commit a prohibited transaction. And that's where the education piece comes in. That's extremely important. However, our goal is obviously to keep the tax advantage status of these accounts if we're holding them. And if a prohibited transaction takes place, potentially that would be lost, and that would be lost business for us as well. So we're both motivated, we're all motivated to keep the funds in the IRA and keep the investments in a tax advantage position, which is the purpose for using the IRA. So what we'll do up front prior to processing an investment transaction is review all of the documents associated with that transaction and that investment. And we'll also ask certain questions to try to understand who's involved, who's benefiting, what's being promised, what are the terms of the investment, so that if we spot a risk of prohibited transaction or any red flags, we will not process that investment. And we will come back with, hey, this unfortunately is not going to work and it's not something that we can hold. And if it's something that they want to try to work differently, we could potentially guide them in the right direction as far as what not to do. We also, prior to processing payments, even after an investment is made, the IRA holder will basically have to authorize payments coming into the account and leaving the account. So when we get that authorization notice from the owner of the account, again, we're looking to see if we notice any discrepancies. If a payment is being sent to a person that's considered a disqualified person, of course, that's going to be a red flag for us as well. So we'll then be having that conversation of, hey, we cannot process this payment due to the risks associated, from an IRS regulation standpoint. So really, the monitoring is where we come into play. And unfortunately, if you've heard the phrase that safety can be inconvenient, it's true, because of course our monitoring of the account activity can extend the timelines associated with getting things done. But again, it's for the safety and well-being of the account. So I think it's important that also prior to opening an account or making an investment that we're having these conversations about timelines and setting the expectations up front, so that if there is an idea as far as what someone would like to do, they're not waiting until a week before the investment deadline to try to open an account and get started on things. So hopefully that answers your question. And again, I think if we can send information related to prohibited transactions, we have a lot of resources for advisors and for clients as well, or investors as well, if they'd like to kind of delve into that. Or even just a call with an investment scenario to just say, hey, is this something that would potentially be feasible that my client's interested in doing, kind of thing. All right, let's see. Did we receive any other new questions? Okay, so how do accounts get funded? Great question. So if a new account is established, a new self-directed IRA gets opened, which is the process that we assist with. That basically be the first step in the process for a new account holder. What happens then, right? They need to get cash into the account in order to start making the investment that they're looking at. So what are some of the ways that they can get cash into the account? This is pretty simple, actually. So self-directed IRAs, from a contribution, rollover, transfer standpoint, work just the same way that other IRAs work. Obviously, what we're looking at is what type of self-directed IRA are they establishing, right? Is it a traditional self-directed, a tax-deferred account? Is it a Roth self-directed? Is it a SEP for business owners? Is it a sole 401k for business owners? Is it another type of qualified plan? And obviously, we're going to document all of that for tax reporting purposes. However, if the client in question has any of the following, an old employer plan that's no longer active, like a 401k or a 403b or 457, even some of the TSPs, military plans, if they're just kind of sitting and they're no longer active because they're no longer working for that employer, those can be rolled into an IRA. If they have other brokerage accounts or other IRAs, I should say, with other custodians of the world, Schwab, Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, etc., who are likely not going to hold the alternative investments, and what they can do is liquidate a portion or all of that account, depending on what they'd like to do. And we can do a direct trustee to trustee transfer of those funds in a cash position to the self-directed IRA. And then, of course, they can always make a personal contribution. The annual contribution limits are the same for self-directed IRAs of their type as they are with not self-directed IRAs of their type. So, of course, the traditional Roth, $6,000 a year for 2019, SEPs, 25% of their earned income from the business, etc. So those limits are the same, and they have all those options available to them. So a good question to ask if they're looking to do something is, do you have money tied up in retirement accounts that we could use for this investment that would give you a tax advantage return? And maybe if they're skilled in a specific area of investing, or you're helping guide them through these specific investments to try to maximize their return, they could potentially earn a greater return doing these alternative investments than the market would be giving them. Not to replace their investments in the market completely, but just as a diversification strategy, just beyond your stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. Okay, let's see. Another question. Does NextGen recommend or refer clients to any specific investments, or do you act purely in a custodial manner? Also a very good question. So we are not fiduciaries, so we do not cross paths or compete with advisors or other financial professionals in any way. We're not able to, and frankly, we do not want to, because our mission is to be a neutral third party and focus on proper record keeping and management of the account itself, and not to try to sway the investment outcomes. However, if a client were to come to us and they didn't have an idea of what they wanted to do, there are resources that we could share with them that our clients have used in the past. However, we're not really able to endorse or recommend specific companies or specific investments themselves. We can only really provide education around some of the ideas and the options, but it would ultimately be the choice of the account owner / investor, and if applicable, a financial professional, to make those determinations. All right. So we talked about the types of plans that can be self-directed. Another question is, what cannot be held in a self-directed IRA? So as far as non-publicly traded assets, are there any other restricted asset classes? Yes, there are just a couple. The only that the IRS has pretty much prohibited or excluded from being held in a self-directed IRA, or any IRA for that matter, is life insurance and collectibles. Collectibles could be things like antiques, wine collection, art, antique art, stamp collections, that sort of thing. Those are not able to be held in a self-directed IRA, but it's just the life insurance and collectibles. So as long as the asset class is not in one of those categories, it's open for consideration. But then, of course, the next layer of investigation to do is, okay, the asset class is allowed to be held in an IRA, but now how am I going to structure my investment, or who am I investing with? Who is on the other end of my investment transaction with my IRA? And is that person a disqualified person according to IRS guidelines? And also, who's ultimately benefiting? Who is gaining from this investment? And are they also considered disqualified people? And if they are, that could potentially be a problem. All right, let's see. We have any more questions? I'm going to give it a minute or so for anyone who wants to add some more. And while we're waiting, I can also expand on the disqualified person's subject, if that helps. Again, we have material that we could share too, but basically what the IRS considers to be disqualified persons or entities from an IRA, first and foremost, the IRA holder. So if a person is using their own IRA to invest, they themselves personally cannot, in the short term, benefit or gain from that IRA's investment. Meaning that, of course, investment earnings can't be paid directly back to them personally. The earnings go back into the IRA as to not create a taxable event. The IRA holder's spouse as well, so husband, wife, partner, also considered disqualified from the IRA. And then essentially ascendants, descendants, and their spouses. So if you look at things in a lineal fashion, those family individuals are also disqualified. Now, I said ascendants and descendants, so that does not include siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles. There's some other exclusions which are okay. Those individuals are okay to invest with the IRA directly, transact with it, benefit from the IRA's investment. So don't exactly know why that is, but the IRS has set these rules, and they do not consider some of those family members to be disqualified. Additionally, fiduciaries of the account. So any financial professional like an advisor would also be considered a disqualified person. So client would not be able to use their IRA to invest directly with the advisor, on a specific deal, for example. Entities that are majority owned by disqualified persons. So a collection of any of those disqualified individuals I named earlier that represent majority ownership of a company, like an LLC, for example. So if it's a family-owned business and mom and dad own 50% of that business, unfortunately, you can't use your IRA to invest directly into that company. If it were less than 50%, given that no one else is being paid directly due to the IRA's investment, then that would be okay. And then some other people providing service to the account, which would be a company like Next Generation, for example, providing custodial services. Obviously, for clear reasons, we wouldn't be permitted to invest with the client either. Okay, another question that just popped up. Did I say whether you can accept annual contributions just as a typical IRA? Yes, that's correct. We can accept annual contributions. Just one thing to remember, if, let's say, the client has a traditional IRA at Fidelity, and then they open a traditional IRA with Next Generation that's self-directed, that $6,000 or $7,000, depending on how old you are, annual contribution limit is an aggregate across all their traditional IRAs. So they just need to remember, and maybe it'd be good to speak with the tax advisor about how they want to allocate their contributions. But that $6,000 or $7,000 gets spread across all the traditional IRAs, which would include the self-directed IRA potentially. Another question: can advisors bill fees directly from the account? Great question. So yes, basically you would invoice the IRA or bill the IRA for advisory fees, and then they would be paid out of the account. On that same topic, because we get this pretty frequently from advisors as well, of course, if you are fee-based and you are advising on the investments and you want to see what's going on with the account, as you know, IRAs are tied to an individual and access is restricted to the individual by default for security purposes. So if you wanted to have access to the account, whether you wanted to log in online and look at the account balance, you wanted to see the asset allocation, or just any information as far as fees and such, you would be able to get, as long as the investor, the client, account holder, provides you authorization to access the account, then you would be able to do that. Basically, what we ask them to do is sign off on a form. It's an interested party designation that they basically then would use to list that individual who they want to have access, and we can accept a DocuSign from them on that form to just basically provide the authorization. And then what that'll do as well is it gives them the option to grant you online access, basically through a separate login we would set up for you. So you'd be able to log into the portal. We would link that client's account to your portal login, and you'd be able to look at all the information related to those accounts. So if you had multiple clients that had self-directed IRAs, we could link them all to the single login for the advisor, so that they could kind of see everything under one roof there. And then, of course, if the advisor wanted to have additional layer of access from the standpoint of being able to authorize transactions or sign off on transaction documentation, that would require limited power of attorney access, and that's also a form that could be completed by the account holder. Because that is a higher level of access, it would need to be signed by both parties, the account holder and the attorney in fact, which could be the advisor. And then we'd need a notary on that form, and then we would be able to provide that level of access for the advisor to, in effect, manage things. So there's definitely ways to get access to the account and to bill fees if appropriate. Okay, another question. Can you walk through a case study of someone funding a self-directed IRA and purchasing a rental property, bank account, titling, fees? So I can talk about this sort of high level without getting into too much detail, but of course, if you wanted to go through all the weeds, we could have our transactions team kind of go through everything that would be involved. But essentially, what the investor would first do is identify the property of interest, and while negotiating a purchase contract, do so in the name of the self-directed IRA, meaning that you would ideally want to have your self-directed IRA already set up prior to starting to negotiate contracts, because the purchase contract would need to be signed in the name of the self-directed IRA. So that contract is what would be provided to the custodian to review and to sign off on behalf of the IRA. If there's an earnest money deposit that needs to be put down, that would also have to come out of the self-directed IRA. So at that point in time, the IRA would need to be funded with the cash, at least to cover the deposit. Again, you wouldn't be able to have the individual do it themselves and then reimburse themselves, because that would constitute a prohibited transaction. So you kind of have to start fresh with everything through the IRA if that's the intention. So then, as far as title search and all that, the owner can do that. If the funds are being sent to an attorney's escrow, we would simply just do that for the client. They would just direct us to do that and provide us with either wiring instructions or other instructions for sending those funds. And then our transactions team would correspond with the title company if necessary. We would sign any and all documentation on behalf of the IRA. And then any and all maintenance, expenses, income associated with that property would come out of the IRA, for example, to pay property taxes, to pay homeowners insurance. Any repairs required to be done to the property would have to come from the IRA's funds. So when you're looking at this from like a real estate investor standpoint, you want to try to kind of budget for the overall project, of course, also considering you plan on earning rental income. So the rental income would be deposited directly into the IRA. So those checks could literally be mailed to our office in the name of that client's IRA, and we would just directly deposit them. And then the cash in their account can be used to cover expenses and things of that sort, or it can be reinvested into other projects. That's at the discretion of the account owner as well. Follow-up question. Okay, this is what you were looking for. You're welcome. What about a mortgage? Great question. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And it's common that this is the case, because how many people just have, depending on where you guys live, I don't know where you all are located, but I'm in New Jersey and real estate ain't cheap. So it's not common that people just have, $500,000 sitting around waiting to do something with it in an IRA to buy a property. So if that's the case, it is possible for an IRA to get a mortgage. However, it's not a traditional mortgage. If an IRA is taking a loan, if an IRA is going to leverage property, then the IRA needs to obtain a non-recourse loan. And basically what that means is if the IRA defaults on its loan, the lender's only recourse is to foreclose on the property. The lender cannot seize assets from the IRA itself outside of the property or assets that the IRA owner has personally. So what that means is, because of the prohibited transaction rules, you can't personally guarantee your IRAs, any loan taken by your IRA. Because basically what that does is extend credit to a disqualified person, which is yourself. Hopefully everyone's following me on that. But this just creates an additional layer of, okay, now we need to understand what non-recourse loans are. Then the next question is usually, who even offers non-recourse loans? So there actually are banks that do. There are about 3 or 4 that we're aware of that regularly do offer them. And we have a couple listed on our website as professional resources. And we also have done a webinar recently on this topic in detail with one of those banks. So if anybody wanted a copy of that, I would be happy to share that as well. But the non-recourse loan is really the option that's required in order to get a mortgage. The other thing that comes with this, which is why sometimes people are hesitant to get into going this route, is when an IRA leverages debt to earn income, in the case, of a mortgage on a rental property, there is typically a tax that applies. It's called unrelated debt finance income tax. And what that means is, depending on the percentage of the investment that's leveraged, that percentage of income associated would be taxable. So for example, let's just say, for easy numbers' sake, it's a $100,000 property, take a mortgage for half of it, pay the other half in cash. You earn $2,000 a month in rent from your tenants, rental income. Half of that rental income, is subject to UDFI tax because half the property is leveraged. So as you can imagine, that's something that's important to let clients know and make sure they understand. And the other thing, though, to note is, as that mortgage gets paid down and that percentage of debt is less and less, obviously that UDFI is less and less. So sometimes people are okay with that because they'll pay that mortgage down and then they'll just use cash to buy new property. So that's one option if there are not sufficient funds available in the IRA to just purchase a property outright. But another option that people like to explore, if they're not gung-ho on the whole non-recourse loan idea, is partnering. So it's possible to form JVs with an IRA and another IRA, or an IRA and another person. So different individuals and or IRAs can partner into purchases where they would co-own a property. So if the IRA just had half of what was needed and the IRA was okay with co-owning that property with another person or company or other person's IRA, they could do that. So then they would only be responsible for half of expenses. Obviously they would get half of income. It's another way to do it without having to get the loan. So hopefully that helps too. Let's see, time check. All right, we are at 1:40. I'm gonna see if any other questions roll in. And if they don't, I have a couple of things, a couple FAQs I can kind of talk through with you guys too. All right, let me go over, while we're waiting, let me go over the timeline for this, because this is an important question and it's one we get a lot. But even so, sometimes I think there are a lot of misconceptions about how long it takes to get this set up. So a conservative estimate in general, if we're talking about client has never established a self-directed IRA before, there's no account set up, nothing has been done yet, from the time the account gets set up to the ability to make that investment, I would say 4 to 6 weeks is a conservative estimate. And the reason for that is, step one is opening the account. As we discussed earlier, The client completes an application with us. Everything can be done electronically and DocuSign, so that's really not the difficult part. It takes 1 to 2 business days for us to get the account open once we receive the completed app. But the part that can be daunting and sometimes frustrating is the funding part. So as you can imagine, and you've probably dealt with this as advisors too, trying to get a rollover process, depending on the custodian's requirements that's releasing the funds. Same thing with transfers. We would have the client fill out a transfer form in order to authorize transfer from another account to the new self-directed IRA. However, the resigning custodian, they all have different requirements as far as what they need on that transfer form. So some of them will simply accept, client signs it, and you can fax it over to us, and that's great. Others say, client signs it, but we want the original in the mail with wet ink signature. In which case you can imagine is now going to delay the process further because we have to physically mail this form, and then we have to wait for the custodian to receive that form and then process it, and we, depending on their processing times, may have to wait several days beyond that in order to receive the funds. And then in worst case scenario, sometimes they also require not only original signature, but a medallion guarantee stamp on that signature, meaning that the client then has to take that form to local bank or a financial institution to medallion guarantee their signature, and then, of course, send that over to the institution. So because of the variety in requirements and processing times by custodian, it is so hard to predict how long it will take to get funds into their account. We've seen it take as little as 1 to 2 days, literally, and as long as a couple weeks. So that part is kind of the question mark often that looms over things when we manage these timelines. The investment itself, as I mentioned earlier in the session, when we do that compliance review of all the investment documents, depending on what sort of investment it is, in the case of real estate, the purchase contract, a copy of the recorded deed. There's a direction of investment internal form that we would require that they complete, basically directing us to send the funds in accordance with the investment they're doing. If it is a note, of course, we want a copy of the promissory note to review. If there's any security associated with the note, we would need to see that. If it's a private placement or investment in a private company or startup, excuse me, then we would be taking a look at the operating agreement or bylaws for the organization, any membership or subscription documents, private placement memorandum, so that we understand the terms of the investment. So those are things that we can start looking at while we're waiting for the funds to come over from the existing account. So to try to maximize the efficiency, because of the delays sometimes associated with funding, as long as the account is open with us, even if it's not funded, we can start to look at those documents. And the review time on that is 2 to 5 business days, depending on the complexity of the transaction. So we do a very thorough administrative review on that. And then once that review's been completed, if there are no corrections needed to the documentation and it's filled out correctly, there's a 2-day processing time for the transaction. Excuse me again. So as you can see, it's just, there are a lot of variables that can affect the time frame there. So it's important to plan ahead. If there's an investment in mind, make sure that it falls within this reasonable time frame so that we can deliver on the needs and we don't put the investment at risk of being missing a deadline. Of course, we don't want to frustrate clients. None of us do. All right, let's see. I don't think we have any other questions right now. I guess I just wanted to end on a note related to you guys and, excuse me, a question just came up actually as I'm sitting here choking. Can you talk about your fees? Sure, we can. And we can also send you our fee schedule. I'm going to make a note of some of the things that have been discussed here that we can provide in our follow-up email with the recording. so that you all can take a look at this information. However, I can speak to this briefly. So our fees are mainly custodial and administrative fees related to maintaining these accounts. We charge a one-time setup fee to open the account for electronic submission of the account, which is the DocuSign option. It's $25. If it is a paper application mailed to us, it's $50. And then the annual administration fee is the primary fee that applies. And that's really the main one that would apply to every single account regardless of what they're doing. So we offer two options for that. The first is the client can choose to pay a flat rate per asset held in the account, and that's $325 per year. Or they can choose the second option, which is rather than an asset-based fee, a account value-based fee. So depending on the balance and the value of their IRA, if it falls within any of the ranges on the schedule, there's a fixed dollar amount associated with that fee, and it's charged on a quarterly basis as the value fluctuates. So we can kind of help walk them through these different scenarios and the break-even points, and at which point one option may be more cost-effective than another. But it is ultimately up to the client to choose when they open their account, and that's something that we include in the application on the fee schedule for them to select. We then have transaction fees associated with account activity. And of course, that's going to vary depending on what they're doing and how much transaction activity they have. But essentially, to make a new investment, to purchase or sell an asset, we have a transaction fee of $100. And that covers our compliance review that I talked about earlier. So the administrative review that we do, looking for red flags, looking for prohibited transactions. So we do a thorough review of that. And then there are some nominal fees associated with outgoing checks or wires, things of that sort that I won't go through all of them now, which may or may not apply, of course, but those will be listed on the fee schedule, which you can see as well. So those are basically our fees. And what I was going to say just before that is, as an advisor, where's potentially the value that you can pass through on this subject to your clients? Because if you're here and you want to learn more about this, it's because you either want to offer this as an advisor, or if your clients are coming to you with questions, you want to be their trusted resource for answers, or at least guidance in the right direction to be able to get them to the places they need to be for those answers. So if all you're really looking to do is just be able to guide them in a specific direction, and you're either not able to, or you're not really interested in advising them on the alternative investments, that's okay. I think the benefit there still is to build credibility and strengthen your relationships with your clients. So, if you're someone that can talk about this over someone that doesn't know anything about it, it does give you that credibility. But of course, if you are a fee-based advisor, you're truly independent, and you do want to advise on these sorts of things, you can earn fees, and that's an obvious benefit. That doesn't require explanation. And then, of course, being able to tap into assets that might be held outside traditional plans for more opportunities for your clients to make investments. For them, that's a benefit. And obviously, the ability to invest in things that they might already know and understand. Maybe they're already into real estate and they didn't know they could use their retirement account to do some real estate deals. Or they're very passionate about a specific company. We're seeing a lot more on the whole impact investing, social investing scale right now, especially with the millennial generation, excuse me. So if there's something that they would rather put their hard-earned funds into that they feel very strongly about, and of course they've done their due diligence and they feel comfortable with the investment, this gives them more options. And of course it comes with those tax advantages. And then, of course, you're free to collaborate with the client and the self-directed IRA custodian throughout the process. It doesn't remove you from the process. As long as you have that access to the client's account, you're able to, be just as in front of them as always, and, help connect them to a resource to achieve some of their objectives or give them new ideas and ways to grow. So I think that there's power in just having the knowledge on this topic. So for now, I think we're at 50 minutes. We have a little bit of time left. I don't know if there are any other questions. As you can imagine, this is a topic that we could talk about for days, but we hope that this at least kind of gave you an introduction to the concept and the idea. And I imagine, I could see a lot of the questions, came from a place of probably having read up on some of this before, or received questions from some of this before. So we're definitely open to continuing conversation on any specific topics. If you wanted to spend more time on something or questions come up after this, I'm happy to talk to any of you. Again, we'll send you an email. It probably won't be today. It will probably be tomorrow, with a copy of this recording, as well as a couple attachments on the email that'll have additional information for you to look over, and then a way to get in touch with me directly. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for taking an hour or so out of your day, and I hope this was valuable time for you. I appreciate all of your intelligent questions, and I hope to be in touch in the future, and we'll probably be offering some additional opportunities through NAPFA as well. So please look out for those. With that, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be in touch. Take care.